everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Orthodox Spirit. I am here with Father Samuel at St. Thomas Indian Orthodox Church.
Yep.
How are you doing today?
Doing great.
Thank you for doing this interview. I really appreciate it. Let's get started with your background.
Yeah, so I'm born and raised outside of Chicago, as I said before. Raised in the Indian Orthodox Church there. My parents immigrated in 1980. So I've been here, my whole life.
Yeah, so you're first generation.
Generation.
Okay.
So grew up in the church there, was blessed to have a good community. I think that was one of the few places at that point. So about 5th, 6th grade, we had a priest come to the church who ended up being there for another 15, 16 years. So until he retired. But he was very proactive with English. And I think at that point, as with most immigrant churches, there's always a struggle between language, right?
Absolutely.
In terms of what language you use, English, or for us, our native language, Malayalam. So it's always kind of a back and forth. So I think with the priest who came, so we call our priest Achin, it just means father. So with Achin who came, he was very proactive with English. So I was definitely a beneficiary of that. So I grew up with a lot of English, what I think a lot of my peers probably didn't grow up with.
Right.
So that was kind of really instrumental for kind of my development in the church.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my parents also were really active in the faith itself. I think that there's that tendency sometimes when you're in a church that has, ritual observances and these kind of things for it to be very just going through the motions.
Right.
And so I appreciate my parents also for just very meaningfully participating in the liturgical life in the church too. So there's the combination of my priest and my parents and family and kind of a lot of the youth activities. And then personally, then I also spent, so when I went to school, we didn't have an Indian church. We didn't have an Oriental church anywhere there. So I actually was very warmly received into the Greek Orthodox Church for a few years. So personally, that was a very pivotal point to also kind of see Orthodoxy outside of its cultural vestiges.
Right.
Which is really formative for me. So for me, to see Orthodoxy, that not just within a cultural, within the cultural kind of parameters of it, but rather to see it what was universal.
Because sometimes that gets confused and kind of mashed together, the cultural side and the church side, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And so because of that, honestly, it was really nice because I think that's formed a lot of how I approach the ministry that I've been entrusted with, right? Because a lot of the people, a lot of kids growing up, they push back or they kind of reject the faith, not really rejecting the faith, but really rejecting parts of the culture. And I think that's where it's been nice to kind of clarify.
Right.
Where, and not to say that, there's a clear delineation, right? It's not a black and white, this is culture, this is faith, but,
right.
Demonstrating the areas where the culture needs to be corrected by the faith.
And do you think that that's kind of an obstacle?
Oh, yeah. Because for us, and I can't speak for any of the other immigrant communities and everything, but for us at least, there's such a minority of people who are coming here that a lot of the times the church became the cultural center, right? Everyone was kind of, working and integrating in the American culture system. And so the touch with the motherland was basically through church.
Yeah.
So then kind of the cultural attachments and relationships and bonds kind of conflated with the faith as well, a lot out here. And so that's why there's a strong opposition to even the use of English in some churches.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
A lot of people don't want to because they don't want to lose the culture.
Right.
So that's a huge obstacle. It's a huge obstacle. It also, there's a lot of people who think that because something is done one way in India, that's just the way universally it has to be done, or that's what it is. And sometimes that's not what the faith is either, right? So there's a lot of that where I think there have been a lot of struggles faith-wise due to the cultural kind of priority that's given.
Yeah. We kind of see a lot of persecution in the Orthodox faith, right? And that's a common thing you see. Is that the same case in India?
Honestly, no.
Really?
One thing about, so Kerala, where like where we're from. So that's where St. Thomas like originally came to India, Kerala. It's like on the southwestern kind of tip corner of India. Very peaceful place.
Really?
And it was a place where for the large portions of the last 2,000 years, like Hindus, Christians, and then when the Muslims came, even the Muslims, like there was just relative peace in that area. So there were periods of persecution which we hear about, but it's not particularly like it would not ever be considered widespread, and it wouldn't be something that we even like people in Kerala are not even familiar with where persecutions had taken place in like northern parts of Kerala and that kind of thing. Like there was a disconnect. So for the most part, I think Orthodoxy or Christianity has lived in relative peace with its neighbors. And you see it because a lot of it is also like the Hindu culture itself is very pluralistic.
Right.
So for them, like if you go to India and especially if you go to like Kerala and that kind of thing, you'll see taxi drivers, auto rickshaw drivers, people who will have like pictures of their gods and then a picture of like Christ and the Theotokos. Because they're just like, they're all like, they revere them, right? Like we'll have Hindu people come to the churches to pray. They have no qualms about that, right? They recognize Christ as a God. Right? So they're very like peaceful with that. It's shifting a little bit now because the current politicization of religion and that kind of thing. I think now there's a lot more tension starting to mount. And I think there's a very anti-Christian trend that's been kind of developing over the last few years, and like especially under the current political regime, it looks like it might be on the forefront, but I don't think, as far as I've come to understand, like there's been any noticeable or discernible like pattern of persecution that the church in India has lived through.
Right. And you think that that's kind of rooting from the politics?
You mean right now? The developing
right
trend? Oh, yes. That's very, I mean, it's like what's going on in America is very similar to what's going on in India.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
I mean, without stepping into that world.
Right.
Yeah, without stepping into that world, I feel that there's a lot of people who know how to manipulate the religious sentiment.
Absolutely. It seems like that's always been the case.
Yeah.
And how is it between, say, the churches in Chicago and the churches out here?
Even within the Indian community?
Yeah, within the Indian community.
Yeah, I think every area has their own little culture. I think that's just like based on city. Like if you've been to people like, if you're on the East, I just came from Philadelphia from a wedding, and like, yeah, it's a different vibe. Like people on the East Coast and like people who grew up in New York, people like I grew up in Chicago. It's definitely very different than like out here when I came here. And I don't know if I could pinpoint what that is. I think every group has their like subculture. I think, where you go to places like for us, like Houston, Dallas, New York, lots of Indian Orthodox people, So there you actually, I've noticed a lot more of the cultural kind of like touch, because people like out here, like none of my youth speak Malayalam. Whereas like in those areas, like people speak Malayalam all the time. The first generation people speak Malayalam. They make jokes in Malayalam. Like that's part of their culture. Whereas out here, it's not the same because we're such a small community here. So there's a little bit more integration, I think, into like the local, like American culture.
Right.
Yeah.
And are there a lot of Indian Orthodox churches on the West Coast or in California?
No,
not too many.
West Coast we have. So there's us. There's a small chapel in San Diego, like 10, 15 families. We have a church in the Valley, which is about 20 to 30 families. We have a small community in Sacramento, about 20, 30 families. And then we have a parish in San Francisco, which is like 150 families or so. So yeah, like that's
fairly small.
It's a fairly small community.
Yeah.
And a lot of people who come through immigration leave. Because right now the cost of living here is
right.
So everybody like kind of runs off to like Dallas or Houston when they get,
It's a lot more realistic to live out there than it is California.
Yeah. So our church actually is comprised of a lot more of the older generation who could like moved in like the 70s, 80s, 90s.
Right. Kind of already established.
When you could actually afford
something.
Yeah.
And what got you into kind of the life of being a priest?
That's I I don't know. It's a how do I put this? I feel like I get this question a lot. I don't ever have a good answer to it.
Mhm.
It was definitely something that was very much a calling. I mean, it was something that I think. So in our practice, we go to seminary to prepare for it. So I know in the Coptic Church, like the priests are selected,
Right.
which I think is an awesome system. Actually, I know that my Coptic friends, they have their pluses and minuses about it, but I think in our system we have our pluses and minuses about it too. Like the desire for the priesthood exists within our community, which is not a good thing. And I think when I was younger, I had a desire for the priesthood, and then by God's grace, between my parents and then my priest, like that, like immature desire became a very real grounded kind of like recognition of like what this life is.
Yeah.
So my priest was very, very insistent on like the priesthood and the ministry and the life of sacrifice. And so for me, it became a lot more sobering as I approached it out of my youth into my like as I got older. And then I went to seminary and then continued to have confirmations and reaffirmations. And then, yeah.
Kind of just went on from there.
Yeah.
And
I'd like to say there was some life altering moment and, some really nice story, but it was just one of those things where, it was just one of those things where it's like very clear across the course of a long period of time that this is what God was calling me to.
Yeah. With the newer generation or the younger generation, do you see that there's more of them being interested in the faith than before?
Yeah. I mean, well, so it depends on what you're talking about more of. I think there's always been a desire for truth and meaning and purpose. I think that is like fundamental to, I think, almost every human I meet. I think what's changed out here, at least with like my youth, is they are engaging with the faith in a very meaningful way. And because of that, there's definitely a lot more who are in the church and in the faith and like practicing.
Yeah.
Whereas like my generation, and even in this church, the generation before me, I think that with the language and with the culture and all these other things, that meaning and purpose and understanding who God was and why and how God was experienced in the church and through the church, I think that was lost on a lot of them.
And you say that they're engaging in a more meaningful way. What do you mean exactly?
I mean, I just have a lot of youth who care about their spiritual life, which I think compared to their, peers and what's available to them outside in this world,
Yeah.
I don't think they have to be. So I think, and that's kind of the difference. I think between the immigration generation that moved here, like they're like here till their death.
Right.
They're in the church no matter what.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like I mean, it could be a good priest, a bad priest. It could be politics. It could be whatever. Like they're here. They're in the church. They're going to be here to the very end.
Yeah.
Whereas like first generation, they have thousands of options.
That's so true.
They can do anything with their time.
Yeah.
They can go anywhere with their time. They can get, I mean, they have, and especially once they get a job and they have like, spending power, it's like, like they don't have to be here.
Right.
So I'm very grateful, very thankful to God and for, a lot of the group here that they choose to be here.
Yeah.
Like they have an investment in their spiritual life, which is awesome.
Yeah, we tend to see that like a lot lately whenever I go online or whenever I talk to other people from other churches, you tend to see like a lot more of the younger generation kind of moving in that direction. Why do you think that is?
Oh, because it's, I mean, the devil knows what he's doing, right? Like there's a lot that's very attractive. If the world wasn't attractive, everybody would be following God, right? But the world is very attractive, and the allures of it and everything it offers is very like, it's very tangible, right? Whereas with God, there's an intangibility there that makes it harder to engage in. And I think culturally being around people who are not of faith, or just being around skepticism, and then being around, honestly, like all the division within Christianity, there's a lot of reasons why not to. And honestly, I'll be honest, the family unit is another big part of this, right? If you find the family, like when I find families who both father and mother are practicing and faithful and humble, I find the kids to be more engaged. And when the parents are not, then there's a lot more complications that these kids have to work through to then come to know God.
Right. You think that's kind of where it starts, though, is
Oh, it's always
family and
always in the home. It's not only in the home, but it always starts in the home.
big part of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you said something about the not necessarily in these words, but the temptation of the stuff around us, right? And it seems really appealing, you know. How do we kind of stay focused when living, you know, in the world we live in nowadays? What would be some advice for, you know, some younger kids trying not to get distracted? And
Depends. So it's hard for me to answer those questions because I generally will take people where they're at.
yeah,
Right. So for me, a lot of my, like, how I approach things, I do think there's a simplicity in our faith in that if you present truth and meaning, then I find a lot of people will gravitate towards it. Even if they struggle with it,
yeah,
they gravitate towards it.
just being that it is the truth.
Yeah.
Right.
Like when you get down to it, who Christ is, who God is, what we were made to be. I think, honestly, what I find a lot consistently is in today's world, the notion of like self-worth and who I am and human dignity, like that's a big question. There's a lot of people who struggle with, you know, self-esteem and anxiety and all these things. And I find, I mean, the only real solution to that is God, right? And when you find that God cares about us and loves us more than our parents, more than our boyfriend or girlfriend, more than our siblings, more than our friend, like when you kind of root that into what it really means, that God actually loves us more than any of these people, and that my worth or who I am or what my identity is not rooted in anything external, but rather where I am with God or what God feels about me or what God thinks about me, then it changes everything. Then the struggle becomes, well, how do I begin trusting that God does in fact love me this much? Right. Once that truth comes in and sets in, then it's like, okay, well, now I have to struggle against all the temptations that are pulling me away, that said, oh no, this person thinks of this of me, this person thinks of this of me, or I didn't accomplish this, or I didn't do this, right? And so it's like, now it becomes all these temptations that pull you away from this fundamental truth that we are made in God's image and likeness, and that we are loved by Him.
And why do you think it is hard for us sometimes to understand that God does love us?
I think because we don't see what He's doing all the time.
Just because a lot of it is kind of behind the scenes. And
Yeah, I don't think, because a lot of it doesn't make sense
right.
to us in the moment.
Absolutely.
Right, like as something's going on, something which looks bad or feels bad or seems like a punishment, we interpret maybe that way.
Right.
When in reality, if the goal is salvation and purification, sanctification, to become holy, that's a painful process. Right? That's, I mean, depending on our levels of self-centeredness and selfishness, ego, pride, like this is a very painful process of sanctification. So what I may interpret, the discomfort I experience now, and I may interpret that as a negative thing, may be very necessary for me to become what God has called me to be.
It's like that molding period. Yeah. And it's very uncomfortable sometimes.
Very.
Yeah. What's maybe some advice to somebody going through that right now? They're maybe on their way, you know, they're doing the right thing. They have their realization and they try to build a better relationship. But yeah, it's very, very hard for them, or maybe they're losing their place in the world where they once were.
I think that, I mean, some of it is going to be on you, right? Some of it's on me, right? Like I need to take care of my soul. Yeah, I kind of say that, we're not called to be selfish, but if there's one thing we need to be selfish about, it's our soul. If I don't prioritize Scripture, if I don't prioritize prayer, if I don't prioritize participating and partaking of the body and blood of Christ, if I remove myself from His grace, right? If I quiet the Spirit, right, which is in my heart, if I ignore it, right, then yeah, it's like, I don't think there's a what's that, the red pill? I don't think there's a magic, there's anything that's gonna like fix everything then, right?
Yeah.
But another part of it though is the reality that we are all members of the one body, and that means we need our community.
Yeah.
So anyone who's isolated, anyone who's feeling disconnected, you need to do the exact opposite. And that's sometimes an uphill battle for people who are disconnected.
And I think maybe like a good step in that is to find a decent church or a community to be a part of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't care. I would just say make sure that you're at a church that, my preference, of course, is that you're going to an Orthodox church, a church that believes in the true presence of the body and blood of Christ, that is living a life that's sacramental. And, if you get a good priest who speaks well, great. If you had if you have a youth group there, great. Like, those are all great things to have, right? If you have a church that does service work and goes out and helps and feeds the poor, that's awesome. Like those are all awesome things. But at the core of it, we need to be connected to the body and blood of Christ, right? And then from there, don't try to do this journey alone, right? So have a priest who can care about you, right? Ask someone to be your spiritual father. Ask someone to enter into this confessional relationship. Like, eventually developing friends within the church, people who are not just behind you because you're cool to hang out with. Because not everybody's cool to hang out with. Let's be real, right? Like, there are some people who are not cool to be hanging out. It's part of the reality. Yeah. But be around people who have the capability of loving. Yeah. Right? That's a very different thing. The ability to love is different than just hanging out with people that you click with. Right? And too often when we're immature, we just care about people we click with. And I think that's also part of why a lot of people leave the church. Because when you're 15, 16, 17, you care more about who you gel with, who you have chemistry with. But as you get older, if you're really growing in the faith, then you will also grow in your capacity to love.
Yeah. And I think that's also a misconception when you're younger, is that the getting along part is also being loved. And the distinguishing between the two sometimes gets tricky. How do you kind of split those hairs?
I'm very big about knowing your emotions, knowing your feelings, and then realizing that feelings are not always indicators of truth.
Right.
Right? Like, I can love someone and not feel good towards them. Right? I can love someone and not feel happy with them all the time. I can love someone and not feel great.
Right.
Right? Because, the very example of it is Christ on the cross. There is no point of Christ feeling happy to be crucified, or Christ being happy to be insulted, Christ being really, really elated to be, persecuted and betrayed and left alone by his closest friends, right? Like none of that's a happy experience, but the work of sacrifice and this actual sacrifice of Christ on the cross and the forgiveness of that moment, that's all, that's what we're called to.
Sometimes we do base our actions off of the emotions we're feeling at the time, right?
Yeah.
And it's very hard to separate it at times.
Yeah.
What's something that you've seen, or maybe even in your own experience, that you've been able to do to separate the two, or not maybe react based off emotion?
That's a great question. So the emotion that I think I personally experience a lot, that I have to struggle with, and one that I see a lot within our community, is anger.
Right.
So that's kind of, I don't know, maybe that's just the Indian thing, but I don't think it is. I see a lot of anger in the world. And one thing I try to work with, especially with the youth on, as well as on my own, is to be very aware of what I'm feeling. Because once you're able to slow it down, because a lot of what I notice is people just go from anger to reaction in a split second.
Right.
Almost to the point where you don't have control. And if I go from an experience of an emotion to an action, right, or a reaction, it means that I'm not actually in control.
Right.
And if that time in between feeling and reaction, if we can increase that time, just put a little bit of a pause there. Yeah. If we can increase that time, it now gives you the space to pray. It gives you the space to bring God into the moment and help you through that. Right? And so that reactivity is something that I'm very particular about.
Because you do see that a lot with humans in general.
Oh, yeah. I used to be very, when I was a kid, my parents would always say, they're like, I don't know how you're ever going to be in a church. Because, I always had, my brothers would always always drive me up a wall. I'd always get angry. And even now, it's like, I mean, I'm not saying I'm too far from that, right? But I'm a little better than I was when I was a kid, right? And a lot of that has been like just allowing God to be in those moments. You know, just even internally, even if it's not a situation where I can actively do something, just to be able to go, like, just to breathe and go, all right, God, I'm really upset right now, or I'm really like hurt right now, I'm really offended right now, or whatever it may be, right? You know, this last week there's been a lot of this. I think I've struggled with anger a lot this last week, so it's interesting that you're coming in here right now, because this has not been a strong week for me.
Maybe it's the perfect week to talk about it then, you know?
It's not been a strong week, so, pray for me.
How do you deal with it in your own, personal situations?
Well, I got to schedule a confession. That's for sure. That's probably next on the agenda. Yeah, but no, confession is one of those things. And I'll be very honest, like I notice I'm worse when I get out of my discipline. So like these last 2 weeks, there's been a lot of travel for me. So I was, I had to go out of state for an ordination. I went out of state for a wedding, and the travel then just like it changes my, scripture, prayer, silence. Like it's harder to capture, even though I know, I know that these travels are happening, but sometimes the effect of tiredness and all these things, I don't properly allocate and account for it. So I notice when I'm traveling, I'm oftentimes the most susceptible to just being very off. So it did so happen that these past couple of weeks of travel coincided with other things that were going on, and so it's definitely like I'm definitely not in my best state right now. So even when you texted, I was like, maybe we want to put it up. Give me a week. I just came in last night, right? Like, give me a week to recoup. But no, you're right. It's humbling to talk about this. And
that reactivity is a thing for most people, and you said something about giving yourself a second to pray in between those times, right? And it's such an impactful moment sometimes that's all you need is a little bit of time, to bring God into the picture.
I mean, St. James says, right, be slow to anger.
Right.
Why is that? Because the slower we are to anger, the more time God has to direct that anger. We were going through Corinthians. I have a couple of Bible studies going on simultaneously. Right? We're going through the word patience, and the Greek of that, makrothumos or whatever, is like it means long suffering, but at the root of it, thumos is like anger or wrath, and what it is, it's delaying your wrath.
Wow.
Which is what God does with us.
Right.
If God responded in his judgment every time we fell, right? So it is a divine quality to delay wrath, meaning to endure whatever is happening and not react to what's happening, but rather at the appointed time to then level judgment, if you will, or to display anger. So that's God's anger versus ours. Well, and that's part of it, right? The longer you hold it, the more time you have to allow God to do something with it, right? Otherwise, we take it into our own hands. Right? If I don't like something, or I'm uncomfortable with something, or something is off, who is the one doing the avenging? It's me.
Right.
I am now the one who is making things right. It's not God anymore. So that kind of like goes back to that earlier thing we were talking about, where it's like, well, why is it hard to have a relationship? Well, I don't know what's going on.
Right.
I don't know what God is doing. And because I don't know what God is doing, I'm going to take it into my own hands. So I'm not going to be patient to allow God to do his work, or I'm not going to be patient to allow God to go through this process of sanctification. And like, I'm going to take care of myself. And what is anger? Anger is a way of me taking care of myself. Anger is a secondary emotion, right? Your primary emotion is feelings of hurt, feelings of loneliness, feelings of fear, feelings of frustration, right? Those are your primary feelings. And then when you can't do anything, that turns into anger. Right? If this conversation wasn't going well, or you said something that was very offensive to me, and I didn't recognize it, okay, you hurt my feelings. Or if I didn't recognize it, oh, this is a very frustrating conversation, then by me getting angry, what I'm doing is I'm manipulating you. Right? Because why do I get angry? To make you stop doing what you were doing.
Right.
So all of a sudden, I've taken a frustration of mine. I'm frustrated with this moment. So I've become angry, and now I've gotten you to act the way I want you to act. Either to be quiet, to leave me alone, to go into a different direction. That's not from God. Right? That anger is not doing the will of God.
Well, what about when it comes to like other emotions? Let's say like talk about like anxiety and depression, right? Sometimes time for that doesn't really.
Correct. So those all have different antidotes, right?
Yeah.
Like every struggle we have mental health wise, and I am an advocate of people seeking mental health help, right? Because not everything works in a vacuum. So I oftentimes like with my youth or with people like go find someone who's Christian, right? Because you find somebody who is a believer, who has a relationship with God, but at the same time, like our mind, body, and like I wouldn't tell you physically like, hey, don't go get a trainer at the gym.
Right.
Right? No, take care of your body. Right? Go find a nutritionist. Go find, it's like don't go to the doctor, right? Because we're called to take care of our body, mind, and soul, right? So these things all work together, right? They're not three separate things. So when it comes to mental health stuff, there are certain times where you should be appealing to a mental health professional. There are times where things are maybe a little bit out in the mental health field, a little bit past the expertise or the competence of a priest. But it doesn't mean you do it independent of your priest, right? But in conjunction with working together. When it comes to anxiety or depression, I don't know if this will be too controversial, but fundamentally, anxiety is a reflection oftentimes of like the inability to trust in God, coupled with the inability to be present. And depression is by nature a self-centered mental illness. If you've been depressed or you've have loved ones or friends who have experienced depression, you'll notice the common theme will be everything will be turned towards them. And it's almost an automatic thought. It's an automatic way of processing that then has to be broken down and fixed. And that's why, like in the therapeutic world, like cognitive behavioral therapy is one of the most evidence-based treatments for depression.
Yeah.
Right? Because you have to stop that automatic thought, which immediately leads to then everything becomes my worth, everything's about me, everything things, and you focus on yourself. Also, another reason why one of the common treatments is going and doing something for someone else.
Right.
Like it's like so there's something that aligns very strongly with our faith, even with the mental health world. Go and serve someone else, right? And once you start serving someone else, you realize, okay, like things are bigger than me, and things are not about me all the time, and then you start developing purpose and identity.
Yeah.
You go, oh, when I serve, like this is good for me, and this is actually helpful for me. That, along with then breaking the cycle of this cognition, which has automatic thoughts and various things like that. Like that's an important part of this process. So I think depression goes hand in hand with the spiritual illness, right? The mental health part of it, the spiritual side of it, it all works hand in hand. And then also physically, one of the things you tell somebody who's struggling with depression is go for a walk,
Right.
get into the gym, right? Like get oxygen, like all these things work together, right? So depression is that side. Now, if there's something that's, and I don't want, and this is the thing, even in saying this, I'm not trying to like minimize this, right?
Yeah.
Because it needs to be addressed, right? If you read the Desert Fathers, they talk about despondency as the worst spiritual illness, right? Despondency, despair, depression. Because at that point, what ends up happening is you lose hope. And losing hope is so dangerous. So depression has to be addressed and taken very seriously. It's not something to be just kind of like, it'll get better on its own. Like it should be something that is treated and something that is addressed. Anxiety, a lot of it has to do with, at least from my experiences, So if you have any other thoughts, please weigh in. I'm always learning more. So for me, it's like, this is like from my very minimal kind of experiences, but like I oftentimes find anxiety is largely related to not being present.
Yeah.
I find it common with people who daydream or fantasize a lot, people who take themselves out of the present, people who, because it's one thing to plan, right? And, if God allows, if God wills, then I'll go here, I'll go there, right? But it's more than that. It's more than planning. It's me going, this is what it's going to be like, and then thinking it through, and then imagining myself in that scenario, and then this person's going to say that, and what if this person says that, and then it's like this huge spiral, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of anxiety has to do with just grounding yourself in the present, which is why practices of the church of, scripture, liturgy, prayer, sitting in silence before a candle, before a cross, before Christ, those are vital to calming our spirit and allowing us to stay grounded, to allowing God to be in this moment with us.
Right.
Right, as opposed to I'm gonna take care of things and daydream and do my thing, and God's like off in a corner, like girl, like God needs to be present. But both, anxiety and depression are very serious spiritual and mental health concerns that need to be addressed.
You don't see it as like a spiritual thing all the time, right? You see it as just a health thing, right? And it seems like it is a lot more spiritual than people may make it out to seem, if not fully spiritual, Yeah. Why do you think we tend to see it like that? Or do you think that's something that's kind of programmed into us growing up?
So coming from an Indian culture, mental health for the longest time was not even a thing. Like, this is not even a, like it's like, what are you depressed about? You have food on the table. It's like,
no, same like the Egyptians.
It's like, why are you being depressed? Like,
right.
Like, it's like, like it was kind of like, so you, like, for a whole generation, they couldn't even talk about this. They had to go find a therapist in secret. And
right.
And now it's warmed up a little bit, but I think too often we like our compartments. Like, just everything being like, my school life is different from my social life.
Right.
My church friends are different from my club friends. Like, it's like, and it's like, no, life, and that's, the more fractured we are internally, the more all of these things will come up. And so once I see my mind and my soul and my body as a whole, as opposed to different compartments, I think it allows us to be more integrated, and we can actually deal with everything.
Yeah. And why do you think it's so bad nowadays for kids growing up, the depression? And I know social media is a huge part, but yeah,
I hate to blame it. I'm not blaming it just on that.
Yeah,
that's a huge part.
Right.
Because even if you try to escape it, like, I got parents here who want their kids away from it, who try to avoid it and all that stuff, who don't give them phones till they're in high school or till they're like end of high school. The problem is, and they can't socially be with anybody either.
Right.
Even church-wise, right? We send our notifications through WhatsApp and this and that. So, like, the kids who, like, don't have phones,
kind of left out.
They're left out, right? Yeah. So it's like, so even if you as a parent were very adamant about how you want to run this, there's no good solution.
It's hard to have that balance.
What I tell, and the problem also is the parents are not immune to this either.
Right.
Right, like, I grew up without any of this stuff, but now I'm all about, I'm also like checking my phone all the time.
Yeah.
I hate my phone. Simultaneously, I gotta always have it on me.
Right.
Like, someone just called me right at the beginning of this. Everybody knows, don't call me. Like, calling me is like like, anybody who calls me is just not gonna get a very good response. This is one of my issues. But yeah, but one thing I remind people is that, like, if you think that you can, through self-control, like through sheer discipline and self-control, like, be able to navigate social media, you're probably in for a rude awakening. Because these people who are programmers and who are designers, they get paid so much money to figure out how to break through your concentration, how to appeal to everything that you want, right? Like their whole life's goal is to make sure that you stay on their program, right?
It's kind of scary though. No?
I mean, we're all up against it.
Yeah.
We're all up against it. One thing I tell parents to implement in their homes. So I grew up with we had like a landline. You know what those are?
Yeah. I had one.
Yeah. So we had landlines. So we only had like 2 phones in the house.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to talk to me, you had to call the house, and then after calling the house, whoever picked up, and then yelled your name, and then you go get the phone. Right. I like that system. I didn't like it so much then.
Right.
But I like the system now because I'm like, there's no like insidious or dangerous calls coming in that way.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing
That's
that
so
goes
true.
on. There's nothing that, and it's a balance between like I also like the free will and the protection of like privacy.
Mm-hmm.
Like the parents who like go and check all their kids' messages and all that. Like I don't like that either because, I mean, at a certain age it's fine, but at a certain point it becomes almost a reflection of like a lack of trust.
Right.
And it's like your kids are gonna make your mistakes. Like my parents knew everything I talked about with all my friends all the time. Like I don't think they would have a good impression of me right now, right? Like we all almost need to like grow through that as well, without hopefully becoming so damaged or scarred by it that we can't, right? So it's like how to find that middle ground, right? And so parents who are too like overly involved, where they like invade all sorts of privacy and have no boundaries, that's not setting up a good precedent, right? Because that's also not what God does. Right? God doesn't do that with us. Right? God instructs us, God teaches us, God loves us, God accepts us, God forgives us, but he doesn't stop us. Right? He doesn't stop us. So what was I saying? Yeah, so with this, like what I tell parents to do is to implement a rule in the house where it's like cell phone usage should be in public spaces.
It's kind of a cool rule for the house, yeah.
So it's like you want to talk to somebody on your cell phone, you want to talk to somebody on your iPad, like iPads, cell phones should all be in public spaces. Do living room, outside in the yard, your kitchen, if you have a den, like we grew up with a den.
Yeah.
So we had one phone in the den. Sorry, not a phone. We had a computer in the den.
Mm-hmm.
So anybody who was using the internet and for that back day was like,
dial-up,
and all that stuff. So we had one computer in the den that we could use, right? I didn't have. Only when I got older, like college, I have a laptop in my room, right? But up until that point, it's like a common use, and I think that's just a safer way to go.
Yeah, especially in the beginning of children's lives, right?
Wow, I'm saying it for parents too.
Really? Yeah.
I say it to couples. I said, don't bring your phone. Like as a married couple, don't bring your phone to your bed.
Yeah.
Right? Go find another alarm. Like if you're sitting in bed texting someone or calling, whatever it is, right? Like you would never invite anybody else into your bed.
So true.
Right?
Yeah.
Outside of you and your kids, nobody should be in your bed.
Right.
Right? So it's like why would you bring somebody else into your bed? That space is sacred. So I'm very much about phones and iPads and laptops in common spaces whenever possible. But that means parents have to follow the rule too.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is also a barrier to get across. Yeah. And I guess it's also impactful when it comes to relationships and couples, right? Like, because it seems like it causes separation within the relationship.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's something that you think would be avoidable if we can kind of implement those types of roles in the household.
Absolutely. I mean, how do we get meaningful time with people? And I think the work schedule and all these things are already prohibitive.
Right.
And then on top of that, in our current culture, see, when I grew up, I'm not going to speak for anybody else. When I grew up, like our extracurriculars amounted to things related to school, church, or family. But even then, like family, church was always a priority. Getting school stuff was there, but like I'd be home by 5, 6 o'clock.
Right.
And the rest of the night I'm at home. I'm not going anywhere else. Whereas now a lot of our kids who are involved in like organized athletics, they're out for long periods of time. They're gone for a lot. Like so all of a sudden, and some families have 2, 3, 4 activities going on. So almost 5 or 6 days out of 7, these kids and families and parents who are running around dropping, like they're engaged all the time. So when are they getting quality time together? Right? Whereas for my household, it was pretty consistent. We're eating dinner every night. We're praying every night. right? It was on the very rare occasion, where everyone was not together every night. So there's a lot of downtime that way.
Yeah, and I feel like when that's not prioritized, a lot of things start to fall apart.
Yeah.
And how do we try to, other than obviously that rule that you have, prioritize meaningful time together? What would be some advice along those lines?
I mean, honestly, it sounds a little bit maybe unambitious, and I think that's the problem, is that people have a lot of ambition. It's good. I mean, do what you can with what God has given you, right? Talents, opportunities, and that kind of thing. But there's almost a point where we get to too much. And I think as a base rule, if you can't have one meal and you can't have one prayer together as a family a day, then you should probably cut something out. Like that, like if one of those, if two, it's got to be 2 of 2 every day or close to it. Right? And everyone's work schedule is different. Some people work night shifts and day shifts. Like every couple, every household is going to be a little bit different, and that's okay. But that should be the target. At least one meal and one prayer as a family a day. And if you can't do that, then you have to really reevaluate. And you have to see, is this a temporary issue that because of some issue with a shift or something with like going on at work or something going on with the kids' school, that right now for this like month we can't do it? Or is this like we're done for the year?
Yeah.
And if it's done for the year, then you got to cut something out. Then maybe it's not worth, going to Kumon, or it's not worth, and every kid will agree with me, it's never worth going to Kumon.
Well, I feel like saying it out loud, it doesn't seem like it's such a big thing, right? One prayer and one meal, right? But
Shouldn't be.
when it comes to implementing that in your daily life, it becomes a problem. Yeah.
Because everyone's schedules are so disjointed. And now because of the role of now people are going back to the office, but like the fact that the internet and the phone connect you to your work, or connect a lot of people to the work, even when they're home and off the clock, they're on the clock still.
Right.
People are still answering emails and responding to stuff 8, 9, 10 o'clock, like when they should be at home with their families, where they're physically home, but they're not present.
Yeah. And you kind of see that a lot lately.
See it a lot.
Do you think like COVID was kind of a big part of that? Because it seems like a lot of people have become more,
I saw it before COVID.
Yeah.
But like COVID definitely made it normal.
Right.
Made it way more normal.
Especially with everybody working from home.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of my parishioners ended up working way more during COVID than they did before.
Right. You see that a lot. Yeah.
And the expectation was that they need to. Say, well, you're not commuting, so the productivity needed to be up.
Right. Wow, it's kind of a scary thought though, that we can't even get one prayer and one meal together.
You'd think, right?
Yeah.
You'd think that should be easy enough.
It sounds easy enough.
Easy, but because you think about it, like kids are home by 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock from school.
Right.
If they're doing extracurriculars, they should be home by 4, 5, 6 o'clock at least, right? So when do the parents come home? Now, of course, like I said, some people work shifts, some people work nights.
Right,
like, there's all these adjustments, right? I remember, like, my mom used to work a night shift, so there are times where we didn't pray. My dad would lead. My dad would be the one we'd pray together.
Yeah.
Like at least one parent was there, right? Even if both couldn't be.
And you mentioned like we've been saying, prayer within couples. How important is it to pray with your significant other?
Oh, like paramount.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Like that's a pillar. Yeah, if you're not praying together, what are you doing? Like, why'd you get married?
Right.
Like, why'd you get married? What was the point of this? Like, hang out with somebody? Right? It's like, no, like, this is a path to salvation. And I say this, I know I'm saying it a little bit harshly, so I always apologize, because I sometimes can get a little bit harsh, but it's like, this is a path to salvation, right? Marriage is no joke. And I see it all the time. Like I see it with a lot of my couples. It's hard. It's hard. It's not even like a look down on someone kind of thing. It's more like you're not equipping yourself. Like if you're not praying, if you're not spending that time with God, like you're really like making things a lot harder.
Yeah.
And marriage is hard enough. Right? It's hard enough for two people from two backgrounds, from two different, like for two people to be made one, right? That's a mystery. How God does it, we don't know. But when you don't then do the things you need to do, it's like it makes it even harder. So it's not like a checkbox. Prayer is not a checkbox. I don't really subscribe to checkboxes in the spiritual life, right? It's something that needs to be done intentionally and meaningfully, and with with purpose.
Right.
Right. We have a prayer in our wedding service. It's just, which is, I'm terrible at quotes, but so it's not going to be an exact quote, but essentially it's, we're asking God to kindle the love of this couple, to kindle the fire of the love of this couple for God, that they may love each other. Right. So you set their heart on fire for God, that the couple then may love each other.
Yeah, because sometimes you see, or a lot of times you see, when God is not a priority in the household, it kind of starts to go in different directions.
Yeah. Because, ultimately you can't live with someone for that long, or you cannot live with someone for a lifetime and go through all the experiences that you'll go through without forgiving. And forgiveness is considered a miracle by the saints. Like, of all the miracles that humans are capable of doing, forgiveness is the one where, that's the big one, right? So if the Holy Spirit resides in this marriage, they will be able to forgive. And if they can forgive, they can endure anything.
So the forgiveness thing has kind of come up before, right? And we say, forgive your partner, right? Where does that line kind of stop? Like, we know, in certain cases, adultery, certain things are just non-negotiables, right? But when it comes to maybe situations of I don't know, maybe just a bad environment or just constant arguing, how do you decide at some point, well, should this continue, or should we kind of just call it quits?
Yeah. Divorce is always a tragedy. And I think any approach to it needs to be recognized as a tragedy. There's a reason why the church permits it, but it cannot be that's one of the first rules when I'm working with couples, even in premarital counseling. That's one of the first rules that I make sure that they know. The word divorce that we refer to as the D word. It's it is a curse word, right? It should not come up in the course of a marriage, because you can't work through problems if there's an out.
That's so true,
right? If both people know that there's an out, or if they can threaten an out, or even jokingly threaten an out, it immediately creates instability. It immediately does. And so it's one of those words we don't throw around lightly. I rarely say I forbid anything, but that's one of those words that I forbid. And now from that starting point, then you look at it and you say, well, when there is a consistent lack of repentance, when a specific partner will not come to confession, will not go to counseling, will not, if there's those situations where it is a consistent, persistent pattern of rejection of correction, if you will, right? Of course, you mentioned when it comes into abuse and those kind of things.
Yeah.
That is something else that we could deal with that on another level, right?
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, this is why I tell couples, find somebody who has a spiritual father. When you're looking for a partner, find somebody who has a spiritual partner. Find somebody who cares about their soul. Because if you don't care about your soul, if you don't care about at the end of the day standing before God, then why would you ever do anything?
Right.
Right? Logically. You of course people are still motivated even if they don't know God, but it's at the end of the day, if I'm not in my inner core, my very existence, aware of the reality that I'm gonna have to stand before God, then I can get away with a lot of things.
Or at least tell myself,
take the easier way out. And so finding someone who cares about their soul, who has a desire for correction, and that's what the connection with having a spiritual father,
right.
Somebody who confesses regularly, who wants to be corrected, who wants to grow. That there's a modern, not modern, like that term, like growth mindset, right? Like, I know it's like using corporate stuff, right? But that's really what it is, right? Like a growth mindset from an Orthodox perspective is wanting to be like God, right? Pursuing the likeness of God, right? So if that's there for both people, then the potential is unlimited,
Right.
right? The growth is always there. The problem is when one person no longer wants to or was never interested in it. And at that point, if that doesn't shake loose across the course of, and this is why God gives us years, right? Gives us years, because sometimes it won't be at the beginning of a marriage. It may be when a child is born. It may not be after a child is born. It may be when, tragedy strikes and someone gets sick. Right. It may be when a parent passes away. It may be like there's different points in a person's life that God may become real to them. But then it depends on the other spouse, whether they're able to wait that out.
Yeah, and sometimes I feel like we put a time limit on stuff like that, right? Yeah. It's really hard to not do that.
I mean, but that's also where this is why it's hard to answer this from a black and white.
Right.
This is the rule 1, rule 2, because you, for example, may have this relationship with God that allows you to bear and endure a lot. Whereas somebody else, then maybe their relationship with God is not strong enough yet. And so right now where I'm at, I'm not able to endure this. And I may find that this is actually very harmful and very damaging to me to remain here. Right? And that's like I said, it's tragic. Right? It's tragic. It's not something that is to be applauded, but rather to be mourned, but not mourned with hopelessness. And that's what I'm like for anyone who has experienced divorce or who has gotten to that stage, it does not mean hopeless. It does not mean outside of the reach and love and mercy of God, right? We, no matter what happens in a marriage or what happens in a relationship, no matter how it ends or how it's still God's love is unbounding, right? And his care and concern for our salvation is still first and foremost. So, even if a relationship were to end poorly for whatever reason, right? Still pursue the love of God.
Yeah, and like you said, having that out, it really does change the dynamics of everything in that relationship, right?
Yeah.
So how important, as well as prayer together, is counseling before marriage?
I think it's very important.
Yeah.
This is kind of a lot of what I do. I work with a lot of couples. It's very important, and yet at the same time, there's only so much that you can prepare a couple for until they live it. So I don't think it's the end all be all. Maybe if they don't have anything, do I think that everything is doomed? No. I mean, but at the same time, a good premarital counseling program and an opportunity to actually learn about communication and learn about problem solving and learn about more about, honestly, a lot of premarital counseling is just learning yourself more, right? Asking the questions and going through what needs to be learned about that a lot of people kind of just gloss over. And it's a lot of times it's things that they know that when I ask them, they have to verbalize it. And when they verbalize it, they start realizing, oh, I didn't realize that about myself, or I didn't realize about him or her, right? And that level of awareness is really helpful. So I think it's very important to have a good premarital counseling experience with someone who can help you navigate that period.
Yeah. Raising kids obviously is another, huge part of why couples have, disagreements or issues. Especially nowadays, it's kind of hard to navigate how to raise children in this day and age, right? Yeah. What would be some advice to kind of not keep them sheltered, but keep them, I guess, going in the right direction?
Yeah, I think every kid is different. One rule I have for all parents is don't compare your kid. That'll just mess them up from the very beginning.
Right.
Don't compare them to their siblings. Don't compare them to their cousins. Don't compare them to other kids in the church. Don't that's number one. Number one, of course, is relationship with God, establishing the household, right? But in terms of the more nuanced things like eliminating comparison as a method of motivation, or even those like little side comments that compare kids to other kids, right? Like teach them about the saints, the qualities and the characters of the saints and the characteristics of the saints, to give them something to aspire to, to be inspired by, but not to their cousins, right? Not to their siblings. I know that didn't directly answer your question, but ask me the question again.
So how do you try to navigate, especially with this day and age, with social media, with the problems with gender, with like all of these things that kids have to deal with nowadays?
Yeah, and I think that was the other thing I wanted to say, was that like, I don't think the solution is shelter.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people do try to shelter their kids from, like exposures and like different things like that. And I think it's very important for us to know what's in the world. But of course, there's an age appropriateness of it, right? Like you don't expose a 5-year-old to everything, right? But I think that there is a tendency from some people within the Orthodox world, within the other Christian worlds and that kind of thing, like the denominations, that is like, we got to shield our kids from everything. We got to stay separated from the world. I don't think that's what we experienced with the early church. I don't think that's what we experienced with the faith throughout the centuries. Yeah. Right? I mean, you have the monks who went to the monasteries and who went to the deserts, but that was to pray and to wage war with Satan. It wasn't to stay away and shield themselves from Satan. Like they went out to the desert to wage war. Right? We have to be aware of and engaged in the society and what's going on and what is happening and why things are happening. And then it's very important to then also, as we kind of talk with our kids, for them to know their identity in Christ. Right? We're in the world, we're not of the world. So it's okay. These people believe this, these people say that, people believe this about, take any of the moral, ethical issues that are out there. You're like, yeah, this is what pockets of the world believe. This is what their reality, their sense of reality is. This is how they understand the world. And this is ours. Right? And this is why we believe what we believe. And this is who God is and what reality is. And that's why our answer to a lot of, like, don't engage in conversations where the other, whoever it is you're talking to, they get to set the definitions.
Right.
Right? Let's be real. Our definitions, our starting points are different. So we're not going to accept your starting point as reality and then try to argue the faith from there. No, it's like we have different starting points. Our very bearing of reality is very different. So for our kids to understand that, this is why this is so different. Right? This is why they believe this, or those people believe this, or this group says this, right? And that's okay. That's where they're at. Right? The villainy of it, or there's a lot of very hateful and angry kind of conversation out there today. And I think that's never good.
Yeah.
Right? The villainization of groups or political agendas or moral, ethical agendas. Like, no, our hatred is only directed towards Satan. Right? Not towards those who are under his manipulation. And that I include within the church. Right? Like, if you hurt me, my anger is not towards you, but towards Satan.
Such an important thing to remember sometimes.
I remember one of our priests who came here and was talking with the kids, gave an example of, if you see a man being mauled by a bear, and you see this and you witness this, would you pick up the stones and throw it at the man who's being attacked by the bear? No. But this is what we do when we get angry and we hate our brothers and sisters. Right? People who hurt us or betray us. When we get angry at them, instead of trying to distract or ward off or pray for the person who was being attacked by Satan, this large and massive bear, right? We would rather throw stones at the person who was being attacked. Right. So that goes outside of just the Christian brotherhood and sisterhood. That goes to the world too. Right? We're called to love everyone. And that's to care for their soul, right? And their salvation.
Father Samuel, thank you so much for your time. This has been honestly one of my favorite conversations.
And it was just, I appreciated the wide range of topics.